Welcome to the SIWIKE podcast, the only podcast that shares the stuff you didn't know you needed to know about jobs, careers, and life. The SIWIKE podcast, the stuff I wish I knew earlier.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the SIWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, the podcast. I'm your host, Luki, and for today's topic, I wanted to address the students in the group, in the audience, and speak a little bit about learning techniques. So the one expression that comes to mind is don't let school get in the way of education. So that comes from Mark Twain, who was one of those prolific American writers who wrote Mark Twain and Tom Sawyer and some of those classics. But what that means for me is that thinking about school and the construct and the infrastructure, it's great. It was great for what it was designed to do about 120 years ago, kind of 1892 from what I understood. It was a bunch of folks in the post-secondary education. They streamlined it, and that's the reason why grade 10 you learn certain things, grade 11, 12, 13, is to help maintain some of that consistency before you go to post-secondary, right? And that was great for the 1890s when it was designed, but it really hasn't evolved since then with the advent of things like online learning or more experiential learning. Some of that is starting to get into the mix, but really only a small percentage versus what was really needed to help with learning. So in order to compete or thrive in the current infrastructure, what I'd encourage you to do is think more about learning, right? And in my opinion, there's a couple of things that you want to take a look at. One is memory techniques. Two is kind of note-taking systems. And then three is general study systems. So let's start with memory. So the first thing, well, why memory? Well, if you think about it, all learning starts with memory, right? Because if you can't remember it, then you obviously haven't learned it. And the thing is, a lot of people will say that, well, I don't have a good memory. And what I've uncovered is actually there's no such thing as a bad memory. There's only such thing as a trained memory or an untrained memory. And most people with bad memories are the so-called untrained memories. So what you'll need to do is figure out, well, how do you train your memory? And humans actually have great memories if they understand the tools and the mechanics on how to leverage that. So if you know the ancient Greeks, before the actual written word was created, they actually remembered like sonnets and poems and epics. So the Iliad, the Odyssey, which are multi-hundred pages worth of stories, were remembered through memory. And one of the techniques that is often cited in the Greek literature is the loci method, loci for place. And it's adapted to things like the memory palace. And what that does is it takes physical locations, because humans actually are pretty good geographically at walking from place to place. So if you can think about your room right now, right? You can probably pretty vividly imagine it, where your bed is, where your desk and drawers and dressers and all that sort of stuff are in there. You can pretty well have a great vision of that in your head. And then what you want to do is take a concept. So let's say a list of 10 or 20 different things. Take the first one and have a very vivid image in your room. Have that as something that is very capturing of your senses. So you see it, you smell it, you hear it. And what you could do is, let's say, remember the Shakespeare's works. So if you were to wake up in your bed and there were two gentlemen there in very well-fitting suits, you can almost smell the must of their cologne in there. And they have these kind of bowler hats, and they have these V's on top of their bowler hat, and they're almost mumbling in their head, V. And what you actually hear is that they're actually saying Verona is what you hear in their head. And if you were to wake up with that sound, you probably wouldn't forget it. And if that sort of image can jog your memory for the two gentlemen of Verona, and it doesn't really matter if you get that right away, but what the point is that you're making the effort in order to anchor that into your bedroom. And then as you go out of your bedroom and you open the door, there's this giant mouse, the giant rat that comes in, and they're kind of in a circus outfit, tutu, going through a bunch of hoops, and there's like kind of a lion tamer that's there, but instead of taming the lion, they're taming a mouse. So another name for a mouse is a shrew. So Shakespeare's second work was The Taming of the Shrew. And if you go out into your hallway and you see a chicken, a chicken that's 6 foot tall, and it's very important that it's 6 foot tall. So how tall you are, make it taller or shorter than you, depending how tall you are. And this chicken is quite an odd chicken because it starts laying eggs, but it does it in a specific way where it lays 2 eggs first, then it lays 3, and then it lays 1. So the chicken represents hen. It's Henry. Henry, and because they're 6 foot, Henry the Sixth, and part 2, part 3, and part 1. That's kind of the significance of that. And you continue doing that, and if you want more of how to remember Shakespeare's works, you can take a look at Lewis Smiles' Memory Palace, and he walks you through all those steps. And essentially, the more vividly, the more crazily, the more action, the more you engage your senses, the more that you will actually remember this. And using those ancient techniques, there are things like linked lists, there are things like the mnemonic alphabet, the major system, and there are other different ways that if you learned how to do that, it might take you a little more to learn it at the beginning, but as you develop that skill, it is one where you won't have to review again and again and again and again, and then forget it the day after. Because what typically happens is when students study, they have to cram for the night before during midterms, and they spend hours and hours doing that. And then by the time they get to finals, they've already forgotten like the day after. So they have to cram and cram and cram and cram even longer. So what you can do is consistently learn and try to remember these things. And when you remember them vividly, then you can remember those concepts a lot more. So that's the first on memory. Go on YouTube, go on books or whatever it is, and find all these memory resources. And in your non-negotiable time, in your model week, allocate some time in order to practice them and use them. Or when you study, know that, okay, you know what, I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes practicing these skills, because as you build, then you'll get better and better and better. So next one is note taking, because sometimes if you haven't practiced your memory, you won't remember all that. So practice taking good notes. And there's a whole bunch of different systems, like the Cornell system, where you'll draw a line, kind of give yourself a margin there, and then at the bottom of the page, give yourself kind of some writing space. And on one side of it, you'll write down kind of main points and questions, and on the bigger part, you write more of the content. And these are kind of key areas that you want to explore. And then at the bottom, you summarize. And there are things like mind maps, where you take a central idea, the topic of today's lecture, and then you write little bubbles and make connection points around them. And there's all sorts of different note-taking systems. But again, taking some time to research them and picking one and practicing it, and then doing it. And then you don't have to be committed to it. So try the Cornell system, try mind maps, and then figure out, okay, which one do you feel helps you learn better? And then using that to grow, and along with your memory techniques to learn even more and even faster. And then the third one are things like study techniques. And these are ones like the Leitner system, which is basically a version of spaced repetition. And what that system entails is basically taking your notes, taking the things that you have to remember, and then reviewing them. And you have 3 boxes, basically a 1-day box, a 3-day box, and a 5-day box. In the 1-day box, you review every day, right? So you review material, you ask yourself, you try to recall it, you try to answer questions, try to apply it. And then if you feel that you have that down, then you move it to the 3-day box, okay? And then any new notes, 1-day box, 1-day box. And then every 3 days, you look at the 3-day box. Once you're finished with that, and you feel that you've accomplished and you understand the material, you put it in your 5-day box. Now here's the kicker. If you feel that in the 3-day box, you haven't learned it, it goes back in the 1-day box, right? So every day you go through the 1-day box, every 3 days you go to the 3-day box, every 5 days you go through the 5-day box, and in the 5-day box, if you feel you haven't learned the material, it goes back in the 3-day box. If you feel that you've learned the material, then you put it aside, and basically you've learned it by that point in time. So you've gone through 1, 3, 5, and then you've learned it, or you might go 1, 3, and then back to 1, 1, 3, 5, and then maybe 3, maybe back to 1, and then all these sorts of spaced repetition areas, it helps you learn. There's a whole bunch of different apps out there. If you Google spaced repetition, you can take a look at ones that'll help you even with flashcards or different things to prompt you on when you should learn. And using those techniques will definitely be of foundational help for you because those are kind of those basic techniques that you'll need in order to learn more and retain more and do that faster. And the goal is for you to build strong foundations. So if you didn't do so well in previous years of school, what you want to do is go back and review and say, okay, did I actually learn these? Because the challenge is if you don't do that, then you're building a kind of a building on very rocky foundation. Because this foundation, it was a 60% foundation. This is a 70% foundation. This is a 40% foundation. If you think about building things that aren't on solid ground, then it'll be more difficult and challenging to learn. So go back and do that. And once you have solid foundations where you think it's like 80-90%, then you can build, and you'll be comfortable. And you'll find that as you do that, you actually accelerate your learning. So don't be afraid to go back and apply some of these techniques to learn more. And something that you can do is ask for help, getting tutors, getting a study buddy, someone who's smarter than you. And then ideally what you could also do is teach other people. Because when you teach, then you learn twice, when you had to do it, and then doing again when you have to share that knowledge. So those are a couple of things, some tips and techniques that will help you with your schooling and your learning, and make sure you get that education. So don't do it for the purpose of getting that A, that grade. Do it for the purpose of actually learning and internalizing and figuring out how you can take what you learned and add value to others. So thinking about memory techniques, thinking about note-taking techniques, thinking about studying techniques, and then a couple of other things that you can use to help you get more out of your education. So that's some SWIKE, the stuff I wish I knew earlier, and hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us on the SWIKE, Stuff I Wish I Knew Earlier, the podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you found this podcast. And if you can give us a review, that would be very appreciated. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn at Luki Danu, LUKIDANU, and the same on most social media platforms. And I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks. Bye.